The morning Imani Asare buried her mother, only 7 people showed up. 7. She counted them. Not because she wanted to, but because her mind needed something to hold on to while the pastor spoke words she couldn't hear over the sound of the wind cutting through the cemetery, cold and indifferent the way February in Toronto tends to be. Her mother had lived in that city for 23 years, had cleaned office buildings on Bay Street for 16 of them, had sent money back to Kumasi every month without fail, even in the lean years, even when Imani remembered eating rice and sardines 3 nights in a row because that was what was left after the Western Union receipt got printed. 7 people. Imani drove herself home after. She didn't cry until she was inside the apartment, standing in the kitchen, looking at the small electric stove her mother had used to make groundnut soup every Sunday. Then she cried until she couldn't anymore. She was 31 years old, and she was alone in a way she had never been before. Her mother had left her one thing of real value, not money. There wasn't much of that. But Paulina Asare had spent the last 4 years of her life, quietly, stubbornly, paying down the lease on a small dry cleaning shop on Eglinton Avenue West. In the neighborhood, people had started calling Little Ghana, even though half the businesses belonged to Somalis and Jamaicans and a Lebanese family who'd been there since before anyone else. The shop was called Clean and Press. It had a green awning that needed replacing and a front window with a small crack in the bottom left corner that her mother had covered with clear tape and never gotten around to fixing. Imani had worked there every summer from age 14. She knew the machines. She knew the chemical smell that never fully left your clothes, the way the steam press hissed when you held it too long, the regulars who brought in the same church clothes every 2 weeks like clockwork. So when the lawyer, a quiet man named Mr. Okafor, who had helped her mother with the paperwork years ago, sat across from her and explained that the shop pot was his now, Imani didn't feel grateful. Not right away. What she felt was the weight of it, the lease, the equipment insurance. The 2 employees her mother had paid cash under the table, who were already texting her, asking when the shop would reopen. She reopened it 11 days after the funeral. She didn't know what else to do. The first month was hard in the way that first months always are when grief is sitting beside you at the counter. Imani made mistakes, mislabeled a suit jacket, forgot to call a customer whose order had been ready for a week, burned the edge of a bridesmaid dress that cost $400 and had to pay for it out of her own account, which left her with less than $300 until the next batch of payments came in. She was running the shop on her own. One of her mother's employees, a woman named BC, had stayed. The other had taken a job at a laundromat in Scarborough and didn't look back. BC was 60, slow-moving, and deeply opinionated about the correct way to fold dress shirts. Imani loved her. But BC could only do half days because of a knee that had been giving her trouble since the fall, which meant Imani was handling drop-offs, pickups, steaming, pressing, customer calls, and the books by herself from 7 in the morning until closing. By the end of the 6th week, she had a permanent crick in her neck and dark circles that no amount of sleep seemed to fix. She put a handwritten sign in the window, "Help wanted, counter plus general, ask inside." He came in on a Thursday morning in March, when the light was thin and gray, and the sidewalk outside still had patches of old ice that the city hadn't gotten around to salting. His name was Dayo. He said it like that, just the one word, when she asked, Dayo. And when she asked for a last name for the application she'd printed off the internet, he said, Mensa Cole, and spelled it out while she wrote it down. He was maybe 28, 29. Hard to tell exactly. He had a calm face, the kind that doesn't give much away, and he was dressed simply, dark jeans, a plain wool coat that was good quality but not flashy, clean boots. He didn't have a resume. He said he'd worked in hospitality and logistics, but that he was between things right now and was looking for something steady, something where he could actually be useful. Imani looked at him across the counter. She was tired. She didn't have the energy to be picky. Can you run a steamer? I can learn. Can you talk to customers without making them feel like an inconvenience? He almost smiled. I can try. She hired him on a trial basis. 40 hours a week, starting Monday. She would pay him cash to start, same arrangement she'd had with her mother's other employee, until she figured out the paperwork situation. One rule, she said as he was putting on his coat to leave. What's that? You don't know, show. You have a problem, you call. My mother built this shop, and I'm not going to let it fall apart because someone couldn't be bothered to communicate. He looked at her steadily. You won't have that problem with me. She didn't know why she believed him. But she did. He showed up Monday at 6:55, 5 minutes before she unlocked the door. He learned the steamer in a single morning. By the afternoon, he was doing counter. He was good with customers. Not warm exactly, but attentive. He remembered names after the first visit. He never made anyone feel rushed, even when there was a lineup. An older woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had been coming to the shop since Imani's mother opened it and who complained about everything as a kind of affectionate ritual, told Imani on Dayo's third day that her new young man had very good manners. Imani told her he was an employee, not her young man. Mrs. Patterson waved a hand. Yes, but still. What Imani noticed in those first 2 weeks was how quietly useful he was. He didn't wait to be asked. If there were garments backed up on the rail, he cleared them. If a customer called and Imani was mid-press and couldn't get to the phone, he answered it and handled the inquiry completely. He reorganized the intake tags one afternoon, using a system she hadn't thought of, but immediately saw was better than what they'd been doing. She almost said something, then didn't. She wasn't sure how to accept help gracefully anymore. She'd been doing everything herself for so long. About 3 weeks in, she found him in the back near closing time, standing at the work table with a notepad, writing something. She thought it was a personal errand, a grocery list maybe. She almost walked past. What's that? She asked, not really expecting much. He turned the notepad slightly. He'd been writing down all the services the shop currently offered, with notes beside each one. Pricing, turnaround time, what competitors on the same street were charging. There was a small list at the bottom that he'd titled Ideas, and below it 3 items. Same-day pickup window, alterations partnership, loyalty card. Imani stared at it. You did this on your own? She said. I had time. Slow afternoon. You know I can't afford to expand right now. You don't need money for the loyalty card. Just a stamp and a printed card. He paused. And alterations. There's a woman 2 blocks north, does tailoring out of her house. I talked to her when I was picking up lunch. She said she'd been wanting to refer people somewhere for cleaning and pressing, but didn't have a relationship with any shop. I thought. You thought, Imani repeated. Is that a problem? It wasn't. That was the thing. It wasn't a problem at all. She just hadn't been expecting it. She took the notepad and read through the whole thing. Then she set it down and looked at him. The alterations idea, she said. Tell me more about how that would work. They stood there until almost 8 o'clock, talking through it. Bisi had gone home 2 hours earlier. The street outside was quiet. The neon of the Haitian restaurant across the road reflected in a puddle on the pavement. At some point, Imani made 2 cups of tea without thinking about it and set one in front of him, and neither of them commented on it. When she finally locked up and they walked out into the cold, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not happy exactly, but lighter. The alteration partnership with the woman 2 blocks north. Her name was Mrs. Owusu, she was 65 and had been sewing since childhood in Cape Coast. Took 10 days to formalize, if formalize even described two women shaking hands over a cup of Milo in a kitchen that smelled of fabric and tiger balm, but it worked. Within a week, Mrs. Owusu had sent 3 customers to clean press, and Imani had sent 2 of her regulars up to get buttons replaced and a hem taken in. The loyalty card cost her $22 at Staples to print. Within a month, 11 customers had asked for one without being prompted. These were not large things, but they were things that were working, and in a season when almost nothing had been working. Imani felt them the way you feel warmth when you've been cold for a long time. Slowly, carefully, like you're not quite sure it's real. She didn't talk to Dayo about any of this directly. She wasn't sure how to, without it feeling like more than it was. He was an employee. She was trying to be a professional. She had enough complications. But she noticed things, the way he always left the back area cleaner than he'd found it. The way he brought in coffee on cold mornings without making a fuss about it, just set it on the counter and said nothing. The way he sometimes stood in the doorway at the end of the day, looking out at the street with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not sad, exactly, but thoughtful, like he was carrying something he hadn't put down yet. She recognized that expression. She saw it in the mirror. He had been there 32 days when the car pulled up. It was a Wednesday afternoon, gray sky threatening rain, and Imani was at the counter doing the week's invoices when she heard the sound of a large vehicle stopping outside. She glanced up through the window and saw a black SUV. Not a limousine, nothing that theatrical but clearly expensive, the kind that government officials and serious business people drove. It stopped directly in front of the shop. A man got out of the back. He was perhaps 60, solidly built, wearing a charcoal gray suit that Imani, who had been pressing clothes for years, immediately understood cost more than her monthly rent. He was Ghanaian. She could tell from his bearing, his face, something in the way he moved through space, like he was accustomed to people making room. He had gray at his temples and a walking cane he held more for presence than necessity. He stood on the sidewalk and looked at the sign. Clean and press. Then he looked through the window, directly at Dayo. Imani felt, rather than heard, Dayo go still behind her. She turned. The color had left his face. "Dayo," she said, "I know." He was already untying his apron. The man came inside. A younger man stayed by the car outside, an assistant of some kind, or security. Imani couldn't tell which. The man with the cane looked around the shop the way people look at places they're trying to understand, and then he looked at Dayo, and something passed across his face. Not anger. Something more complicated than anger. "Your mother told me where you were," the man said. His English was precise, lightly accented. "Eventually, I asked her not to. I know you did." A pause. 32 days, Dayo. I wasn't finished." The man looked at Imani then. He looked at her the way fathers look at situations their children have put themselves in, assessing, cautious, not unkind. "You are the owner." "I am," Imani said. She said it clearly. She had learned, in the months since her mother died, to say that sentence without apology. He nodded slowly. "My son," he said, "has been working in your shop for a month, I imagine without telling you anything about himself." Imani looked at Dayo. Dayo was looking at the floor. "He told me his name," she said. "Dayo Mensah-Cole." A beat. "I didn't ask more than that. My name is Kwabena Mensah-Cole," the man said. "I own Mensah-Cole Group. We have holdings in logistics, commercial property, and food distribution across Ontario and Alberta." He paused to let that settle. "My son is the executive director." The shop was very quiet. Outside, a streetcar went past on Eglinton, its bell distant and ordinary. Imani looked at Dayo again. He finally looked up. "I wasn't lying," he said. I didn't say." "Why?" she asked, And she was asking it the way she needed to ask it, directly, not as an accusation but as a real question, because she genuinely needed to understand. He was quiet for a moment. Then, because I needed to know what it was like, to just work, to be useful without it meaning anything except that I was useful. I've been in boardrooms since I was 24. I don't always know how to. He stopped, started again. My grandfather started with a stall at a market in Accra. My father built the company from that, and I've been handed something I didn't build. I wanted to understand what it felt like to start from the ground. So you chose a dry cleaning shop on Eglinton. I chose this shop, he said. Specifically. She waited. My grandfather used to bring his clothes here, he said. When he was old and living in Brampton and my grandmother was sick. Your mother pressed his shirts. He talked about this place for years, said the woman who ran it, had hands that respected fabric. He looked at the walls of the shop, at the faded photograph Imani's mother had hung near the steam press, a picture of a market in Kumasi, taken in the 80s. I wanted to see if it was still the kind of place he described. Imani felt something catch in her throat. She stood there for a moment, not speaking. Then she looked at the older man, at Kwabena Mensah Cole, who had built something from nothing, just as her mother had built something from nothing, who had raised a son who felt the need to understand labor from the inside out, and who was now standing in her shop with the patience of a man who already knew how the story ended, even if he was letting it finish in its own time. "Mr. Mensah Cole," she said, "can I get you a cup of tea?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he did something she didn't expect. He smiled. "I would like that very much," he said. She poured tea. Bisi, who had come in for a half day and been pretending to sort hangers in the back for the last 10 minutes, emerged with the unearned confidence of someone who had absolutely been listening and handed Kwabena the good mug, the one without a chip in it, and said welcome in a way that implied he should have come sooner. They sat, all four of them, Imani, Dayo, Kwabena, and Bisi, who had simply not left. The afternoon light shifted. Someone came in to pick up a comforter, and Dayo handled it automatically, without excusing himself. Just went to the rail, found the tag, processed the payment, thanked the customer by name. His father watched this, said nothing. When the customer left, Kwabena set down his mug. "I came to ask you to come back," he said to Dayo. "I know. There are things that need your attention. I know that too." Dayo looked at Imani. "I was going to tell you. I had decided. This week, I was going to tell you." She believed him. She wasn't entirely sure why, except that over 32 days, she had watched him be exactly what he appeared to be. A person trying to do good work, honestly, with care. Whatever else he had not said, that part had been real. "Tell me what?" she asked, though some part of her already sensed it. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat, the good wool coat she now understood differently, and set something on the counter. A business card, and beside it a folded piece of paper. She unfolded the paper. It was a letter, handwritten. She read it once, then read it again. It proposed a partnership, not charity. Dayo was careful to write that, underlined it once. A genuine commercial arrangement. Mensah Cole Logistics had a fleet of drivers running routes through the west end of the city 6 days a week. There was no reason, the letter said, that Clean and Press could not offer a pickup and delivery service for dry cleaning, attached to that network, at a margin that would more than cover Imani's overhead and allow her to hire a second full-time staff member. He'd worked out the numbers in the margins. He'd included Mrs. Owusu in the projections, noted the alteration partnership with a small asterisk. He had been thinking about this for weeks. Imani set the letter down. "You wrote this before your father came," she said. "2 weeks ago," he said. "I was waiting to find the right way to. I didn't want it to seem like you were buying something." "Yes." She was quiet for a long moment. BC made a small sound in the back of her throat that could have meant anything. Outside, the streetcar bells again. My mother pressed your grandfather's shirts, Imani said finally. She did, and you came here because of that. I came here because of that, Dayo said. And then I stayed because. He paused, looked at her. Because this is a good shop, and you are trying very hard to keep something alive that deserves to be kept alive. And I thought maybe I could help. Kwabena Mensa Cole picked up his cane and stood slowly. He looked at his son for a moment, and in that look was an entire conversation that Imani was not part of, and did not need to be, something between a man and his father, complicated and earned. Then he looked at Imani. My grandfather, he said, meaning his own father, Dayo's great-grandfather, started with a stall and a reputation for honesty. He used to say that the only business worth doing is the kind where both people leave the table with more than they came with. He gave her a small nod. Think about the letter. He left. The younger man outside opened the car door. The SUV pulled into traffic and disappeared east toward the avenue. Imani stood at the counter for a while after. Dayo hadn't moved. He was still there, in the apron he'd put back on without seeming to notice, standing by the intake rail, where the uncollected garments hung in their plastic sleeves like a held breath. You can say no, he said, to the proposal. The letter, all of it. I know I can. I mean it. This is your shop. I don't want you to feel. Dayo, she said it quietly, but clearly. I know you mean it. He was silent. She looked around the shop. At the cracked window her mother had covered with tape, at the photograph from Kumasi, at BC, who had sat back down on her stool and was making absolutely no pretense of not watching them. At the steam press, her mother had bought second-hand in 2009 and maintained with the particular affection people reserve for reliable things. Her mother had built something here, in a city that had not always been kind to her, with hands that, apparently, a man in Brampton had remembered for years. That was the kind of work Imani Asare had done, the kind that outlasted the person doing it, the kind that became part of someone else's story before you even knew. Imani thought about what it meant to receive help without it, meaning you couldn't stand on your own. She thought it might mean something like this. Come back Monday, she said. Dayo blinked. To work? To work. And we'll talk about the letter properly, with a contract, with a lawyer, like two people doing a real thing. She held his gaze. But right now, before you go, can you fix the rail near the back? It's been loose for a week, and I keep forgetting. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his face that she'd seen these past 32 days. That quality of carrying something without putting it down. Eased, just slightly. Yes, he said. I can do that. He went to the back. She heard him moving things around, finding the right tools, beginning. BC got up and collected the mugs. She paused beside Imani and said, in Twi, something that roughly translated to, your mother would have liked him. Imani looked at the cracked window with the tape over it. She thought she was probably right. Here's what nobody tells you about love that is actually worth something. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up with noise and ceremony. It shows up on a Thursday morning in February, in a wool coat and clean boots, asking if it can be useful. It learns your systems. It stays past closing. It writes things down on notepads and thinks about your problems the way other people think about their own. And if you're paying attention, if grief hasn't made you so careful that you've sealed every window against the cold and the light both, you notice, you let it stay, you fix what's been loose, and you begin. Before you go, if this story stayed with you, we'd love to know, would you have read that letter? Or would the 32 days of not knowing have been too much to forgive? Leave your answer below. And if you're new here, welcome to Urban African Folktales. We'll be here every week, telling the stories that hold.